so everybody knows when they arrive. Fantastic. Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to give everyone just a minute to log in here, and then we'll get started.
Just started the webinar.
All right. All right, so thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Caitlin Southwick. I am the founder and executive director at Key Culture and Key Futures. And I am so excited today to be joined by my fabulous colleague, Gwen Fife, who has been heading up, along with Julia Wagner, the WP8 of GoGreen project. So I'm going to give everybody just a minute here as we're logging in, and then we'll get started with the presentation. Right, so I'm just letting everybody in here. Okay, great. I think we'll go ahead. All right. So in case you missed our Go Green introductory webinar, we are going to be doing a series of webinars throughout the entire Go Green project to let you all know what we're working on in the Horizon Europe Go Green project. Go Green is all about figuring out how we can connect green and conservation. But when we start talking about this, there might be a little bit of confusion on what we actually mean. We know that green conservation is something that is really popular right now, and the term is being tossed around, but without a lack of clarity on what green actually means for the sector, it's very difficult for us to be on the same page, and even more difficult for us to actually enact green conservation. So a big part of the Go Green project is to figure out and define what green actually means. Hi, Julia, welcome. I'm going to pin you as well so everyone can see you. All right. So Key Culture is the leader of Work Package 8. And along with my fabulous colleagues, we are here to tell you a little bit about what we're going to be doing throughout the program, as well as showcase what we've been doing to date. One of the really important things for us throughout this entire process is that it remain co-creative. I think we all learned from the museum definition in ICOM that transparency is incredibly important when we're tackling such big issues, as well as input from around the globe. So it's our great pleasure to present to you today the working definition of green for green conservation, as well as invite you all to give your feedback and participate in additional focus groups whereby we can help to really solidify the definition of green. One of the reasons that defining green is really important, as I mentioned, is not only for us to all actually have a terminology that we're working with that is similar, but also it's a really important way for us to be able to advocate for greener materials, greener practices, and also greener methodologies. So by defining green, we can actually have our, oh, sorry, it's asking me, my speaking language is English. Thank you. Thank you for turning on the captions. So by having a green definition, we'll be able to not only have consensus across the board in terms of what we mean with green conservation, but we can advocate with our membership organizations, including ICOM, IIC, AIC, AICCM, all of our fabulous supporters from around the globe, as well as with our vendors and suppliers and our manufacturers. So it's important for us to have a really good idea about what green is so that we can actually effectively implement it. As part of our Work Package 8, we are, of course, first defining what green means, and then we're going to be spending a lot of time and energy advocating for the uptake and adaptation of this definition of green. So after our green definition, you will be seeing us spreading the word far and wide about what green means for conservation and how we can effectively implement it. So you've heard enough from me. We're really here today to hear from Gwen and Julia. So I'm going to turn over to Gwen to tell us a little bit more about the process of defining green and where we are at today. So Gwen, thank you for joining us.
Just unmuting myself. Thank you very much, Caitlin. I hope that my voice holds out. Got a bit of jet lag and a little cold. So I'm just going to start by sharing our presentation. Just bear with me. and start the slideshow. So can you see my slides correctly? Perfect. So as Caitlin very eloquently put it, we are here today to really discuss refining the definition of green within the conservation of cultural heritage. And this is as part of, indeed, the Go Green project, which aims to support our transition to greener decisions and practices. And so, yeah, as she said, we have a presentation, more or less 30 minutes, I think, and then we should have plenty of time for a little Q&A, and that'll be the conclusion of our webinar, but we will also have the opportunity for you to join a focus group in June. We'll give the details at the end of the presentation. So, yeah, and if you have any questions, you can just pop them in the chat during the talk as well. So as mentioned, the part of our Go Green work that we're showing in this presentation is defining green conservation, providing a holistic definition of what green means to our field and defining our green parameters. The aim is to summarize here where we're coming from in our creation of a green definition, and with this being a work in progress, where we currently are with our work. So in our approach, we do have the great benefit of a framework that we have illustrated here. These are the linked parts as constructed in the project. These reflect our practical realities in conservation, which are namely, the holistic definition and the specific parameters for defining green. These can be applied in material developments, in greener conservation decision-making, and of course by conservators for comparing specific materials and approaches in their treatments. So I'm going to give a hopefully concise presentation here to show where we're coming from with our creation of a green definition and delving into the parameters a little bit. So outlining in brief our research strategy to refine the green definition. Considering the origins of green, this is from the principles of green chemistry. We've been further examining the current status and understanding of green terminology, both within but also out with our field. It's also been really helpful to research how other sectors have tackled and defined the green concept for their industries. So whilst of course considering the complexity also of the conservation context, we also aim to create parameters that are easy to understand and use. As Caitlin said, input from others and feedback has also been very important at every stage alongside this research we're carrying out. We've adopted a connected process of research and feedback, considering alignments and inputs from within Go Green itself. So in the first place, workshops and meetings that we've had within the consortium, and also regarding the importance of involving the broader conservation community during this work through lectures, surveys, and focus group meetings. We're not doing this work in a vacuum, and we have to consider the broadest roles in the conservation of cultural heritage. Although aspects of our work in defining green is focused on those specifically carried out only by conservators, of course, such as the practical treatment decisions and the potential selection of conservation materials, we also aim to recognise the highly variable role of the conservator and the need for the green conservation definition to align within all the activities that conservation decision makers and takers undertake. So really holistically considering the role of all cultural heritage professionals in their care for cultural heritage, which resonates with the first point in the Green Manifesto, which was published in 2023 by many of our Go Green colleagues, namely that we all contribute to the green movement. So starting's big task for our holistic definition, examining the current status and understanding of green terminology, and looking to the methodologies used in other industries, we've found consistent support for rooting that definition from the perspective of sustainability and sustainable development. And therefore, the UN's Our Common Future statement in the Brundtland Report from 1987 is a really logical and popular place to start. More than 35 years later, it's as imperative as ever. Humanity has the ability to make development sustainable, to ensure that it meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. There's, of course, an immediate link between this aim and us, since in safeguarding cultural heritage artworks and artifacts, conservation is fundamentally concerned with the needs of future generations. Hence, our work is very much aligned with the principles of sustainability. Just to explain a little, with sustainability and overarching description, it's traditionally described as having three main pillars: environmental, social, and economic. There's also potential division between weak and strong sustainability, with protecting ecological integrity, strong sustainability. This perspective is presented in the nesting model here on the right. Sustainable development, meanwhile, is rather a practical term referring to the many processes and pathways to achieve sustainability. And accordingly, in 2015, 17 Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs for short, with 169 targets, were set out by the UN to address the key social, economic, and environmental issues in ensuring sustainable future development. When looking at how other industries created a holistic definition, a demonstrated strategy is to define strategic impact areas based on these SDGs that relate to a profession. So in this slide, we have the example of the World Green Building Council. It was founded in 1993. To mobilize the building construction sector to enable a shift towards sustainable development, they prioritized 11 SDGs where within their industry, they can actively support the Green Deal targets for 2030. So the most relevant SDGs have been bundled to clarify the circular impact areas, which are shown on the left. These have then been built upon to create a holistic definition, which is shown then on the right. And in this way, the definition is really securely anchored and aligned with the targets of these related SDGs. And so we thought this was a great approach. And so we started to do the same thing, to look for the SDGs with align most with our work impacts. Now, one can link heritage in general with all the SDGs. This was demonstrated very well in the ICOMOS policy paper that was recently published. An SDG target 11.4 specifically addresses protecting the world's cultural heritage. This is one of the most explicit references to cultural heritage aspects in the SDG. And looking from a conservation perspective, we've of course tried to focus attention on considering the main or key impacts of collection care, conservation, and conservators' decisions. Doing that, we find the clearest overlaps of the SDG targets and potential impacts with 3, which is good health and well-being, 8, decent work and economic growth, 10, reduced inequalities, 11, sustainable cities and communities, 12, responsible consumption and production, 13, climate action, 14, life below water, 15, life on land, and 17, partnership with the goals. Considering a strong sustainability perspective then with ecological integrity and the WHO's One Health concept, which elaborates how the health of humans, other living species, and the wider environment are closely linked and interdependent, there's a strong connection between our decisions and our approaches. For instance, in energy demand implications and the choice of materials, and our health, climate, and resources. The direct and indirect environmental and health impacts from our decisions in preventive care, in specifying certain condition requirements or not, in applying certain treatments or not, and using specific materials and methods are logically high strategic impacts for our field. Speaking at the AIC conference last week, there was also a moment of seeing links between our Western scientific approach in this and its correlation with long existing Indigenous knowledge, with one speaker, author and Shoshone tribal leader, Darren Parry, beautifully describing how his grandmother would talk about our non-human kinfolk, referring to the species of plants and animals sharing the environment in which we live. And in fact, this One Health perspective is already expressed in our professional guidelines, which dictate that conservators shall strive to use only products, materials, and procedures which, according to the current level of knowledge, will not harm the cultural heritage, the environment, or people. So actually, these SDG-related aspects are already embedded in the profession's code of ethics. In addition, of course, we have to consider our decisions always with safety of the original materials as paramount. And in terms of practical treatments, the material and technical requirements regarding safe efficacy for the specific use. Cultural heritage has a major role to play within socio-economic factors through tourism and social cohesion, to name just a few. And its importance for our well-being can probably not be overstated. The protection of cultural heritage that we carry out through its care and conservation is therefore a major role and is itself a goal in sustainable development. So beyond how our profession links with the SDGs, we also have the added impetus of the big policy aims, such as the Green Deal, by which the EU aims to reduce net greenhouse gas emissions by at least 55% by 2030, as compared to 1990 levels, and for Europe to become climate neutral by 2050. Also relevant to our environmental strategic impacts, the European Green Deal aims to reduce air, water, and soil pollution, move towards a circular economy, and improve waste management, which are all accordingly outlined in the Safe and Sustainable by Design framework. So, tying it all together, to enable the green transition in our profession, and not least future-proof conservation jobs and skill training, we have to combine these multiple factors in our holistic definition, namely the specificities of our profession, the SDG targets, and the relevant policy aims. So like with the example of the World Green Building Council we showed. And this enabled us to clarify the high strategic impacts in conservation that I mentioned, which are shown on the left here. And by grouping them together, we see we have strategic impacts in climate, resources, health and well-being, and cultural heritage. Cultural heritage is specified considering its relevant impact within each of the pillars of sustainability. So these relate to our activities in terms of energy use and decarbonisation, zero waste, availability, such as impacts on biodiversity, reducing pollution, skills training, future-proofing, and accessibility considerations, and not least social cohesion. In these times, that's not to be underestimated. We can thereby create a holistic definition that's rooted from the principles of sustainability and aligns with these key strategic impacts. Creating an initial draft holistic definition on this basis, we first workshopped it within the GoGreen Consortium, where we got key input. And this illustrates the approach we've been taking, linking the research we're carrying out and simultaneously incorporating input and feedback. First, we had amazing input from experts, both within and with the consortium, including input from researchers from the projects in our Horizon cluster, namely Moxie and Green Art. And then we've opened our work in progress to a few focus groups where we've received really a lot of helpful and insightful feedback. From this, the work in progress holistic definition has now become, and I'll read it out, conservation has a uniquely positive and powerful role to play in shaping a sustainable future. It preserves cultural heritage for current and future generations and increases economic and societal resilience. Cultural heritage is endangered because of climate change and environmental destruction. Assessing and adapting professional practices to help combat these ultimate agents of deterioration is therefore in itself cultural heritage conservation. A green conservation approach prioritizes the environment and human health through holistic heritage conservation decision-making. Aligned with conservation ethics and values, it allows for future developments in the conservation field and considers the entirety of consequences before, during, and after interventions. Cultural heritage professionals should actively advocate adopting a green conservation approach with support in accordance with the economic, social, and environmental pillars of sustainability. We've also created the definition of green in the paragraph below, which links directly to the associated parameters. So I'm going to first come to those. These are, of course, critically linked with our definitions and also should be workably applicable in conservation, namely for within material developments and for cultural heritage professionals to be able to factually assess their decisions and choices. And in fact, a further aim in this project is that these parameters will also be practically expressed in an app being created in GoGreen, which should help conservators assess the impacts of their treatment decisions and material choices. For further specifying these parameters, it's pertinent to look at the origins of green terminology. And this occurred with the development of green chemistry in the 1990s. But since then, green has been very successful at getting broadly adopted in the general lingo. Within the initial context of chemistry, though, green was fundamentally a concept to reduce hazards and impacts in industrial processes. And so on this basis, in the first place, a green material or process would be safer. But the term green is often used quite arbitrarily and sometimes simply to describe a manufacture from renewables. Being derived from non-food biomass would be indeed one characteristic of the ideal green material, but it would also include being benign during use and end of life, as it would consider the least environmental impact during every stage of the material's life cycle. An example of a solvent's life cycle is shown here on the slide. Coming from a renewable source does not necessarily equate with a lower human or environmental toxicity. So since the 1990s, green chemistry itself has also evolved and been augmented with sustainability considerations, which has given rise to green and sustainable chemistry. This better incorporates the entirety of life cycle impacts. In keeping with this and the EU's Safe and Sustainable by Design framework I mentioned, the raw materials, production, use, and end-of-life impacts should all be considered beforehand when designing any product or process. And within this, the influence of use is acknowledged. Green can only be defined in the context. It's a comparative term. As mentioned, part of our work and research involves checking for correlations in our definitions and parameters within and out with our field. At the start of our work, it was actually mostly Julia's amazing work. We compiled a database where we've been collecting the different types of literature related to our research. This has included scientific publications, existing policies from our field and beyond, also pertinent tools and data sets and conservation literature, where we've been checking for green-related terms. Included in the database are also many related forums and websites for our field. For looking at the use of green terminology, we've also been really fortunate to have valuable ongoing assistance from others in reviewing the literature, including fortuitous collaboration with Anna Turina, who's working on this topic for her PhD. It's a beautiful coincidence. Within chemistry and in the conservation of cultural heritage, we have over 260 resources in our database. We've divided these into priorities 1, 2, and 3 based on relevance, and we've almost completed reviewing the first most critical group. We've also been collecting and reading some relevant policies and decision-making directives. These correlate with the green transition, whilst generally aimed at manufacturers and consumers, whereas in the terminology of REACH, we're rather professional downstream users. These are naturally relevant aspects for considering in our work. So one of these, the new Circular Economy Action Plan, is addressing greenwashing in consumer products and the need to allow consumers to make their choices based on transparent and reliable information on the sustainability, durability, and carbon footprint of the products. It aims to regulate the use of environmental claims through the establishment of solid and harmonized calculation methods, which cover the full value chain. And this is obviously relevant for inspiring our work. Similarly, in the Canadian procurement policy, environmentally preferable goods and services are those that are defined as having lesser or reduced impact on the environment over the life cycle of the good or service when compared with competing goods or services serving the same purpose. So these are also kind of information that we're collecting and reviewing. And so far, considering and combining all the perspectives and approaches, we have very good correlation so far with our definition and parameters. We find that the terminology of greenness in conservation is indeed frequently used to emphasize full safety, which reflects consistency with its green chemistry origins. Overall, the literature is also clearly supported, considering sustainability as a fundamental starting point for a holistic perspective and definition. And in the previously mentioned review paper by Del Curto and Anna Turina, they noted that there was not clarification of green conservation, and it's certainly needed. We've also seen general agreement in recognizing an absence of hazard symbols as a core of green conservation, and that green can only be defined in the context. It is a comparative term. So this input and that comparative aspect that's very important is reflected in our green definition, which I will also now read. Green conservation is not harmful to the environment or to the conservator. It's carbon neutral, zero waste, accessible, and available. Green conservation is an ideal which we strive for through greener conservation, which takes all these aspects into consideration in line with current and continuing research. Greener conservation practices encompass a decision made within the context of collection management, any preventive measure or treatment, the materials used, the frequency of treatment, and long-term impacts. Greener conservation reinforces and furthers the positive role of conservation in the sustainability of our culture. And as I mentioned, this definition connects with the green parameters that we've been compiling. So to the left of the parameters here, G1 through S14, are specified the related SDGs and ultimately strategic impact areas to which each parameter links. So in elaborating the parameters, alongside the links we have with the SDGs, we've taken the approach one would take in a life cycle assessment. Incorporating the principles of sustainable green chemistry, we have the application of hazard and life cycle assessments in accordance with the Safe and Sustainable by Design framework. And this gives us a list of at least potentially measurable quantitative parameters, which are shown here in red, that can be used for assessing new materials and that conservators can also use to compare the already existing materials they might apply in a treatment. Here, looking at them with the strategic impact areas highlighted in blue, green, and pink, and also included and highlighted in yellow, are the quantitative and qualitative parameters or impacts we need to consider, which properly reflect our professional requirements and can account for the individuality of the artwork or collection and its particular circumstances. Even when these are not measurable quantitatively, these are still critical to include. As mentioned, cultural heritage conservation itself has a special role as a goal in sustainable development. So we therefore aim to acknowledge throughout the conservation's decisions and conservators' methods based on the individual needs of the objects and specificities of that situation. Consistent with an LCA approach, the artwork is thereby itself considered as an area of protection. And I'll just read through them. So we have G1, toxicity and hazard metrics for the environment, direct and indirect. G2, toxicity and hazard metrics for the user, which would be direct and indirect. We have G3, energy regarding indoor climate control and outdoor user location. G4, energy with regarding to the consumption of energy with a specific application, including preventive requirements, the active conservation, analyses that might have to be carried out, and after treatment implications. G5, we have energy, including carbon footprint of the materials, so existing as in the Stitch calculator, for instance, regarding the GHG, the greenhouse gas emissions, and the carbon dioxide equivalency. And then we have impacts on resources, G6, regarding availability in terms of water use and resource depletion, G7, biodiversity impacts, and G8, the waste aspects, disposal, reusability, the Rs. Then we have our artwork-specific professional parameters, G9, material selection and application method, G10, the number of applications or quantity, G11, the longevity of treatment, so how long the treatment will allow the objects to be in retreat, the durability and lifetime of the materials being used. S12, the accessibility, the availability of it in production, purchasing and location, transparency of the product information, and cost of the materials. S13, quality of the result. S14, accessibility in terms of ease of use, time for testing, the adaptations during treatment, and the time needed for treatment. And this slide is just giving a bit more detail about the construction analysis as we go along to check on the balance of the parameters. Firstly, for within the three main pillars, within a strong sustainability model, we have about a third for each pillar. And also for the balance within the categories, so we have 2 for hazards, 3 for climate, and 3 for resources, which gives us a total of 8 general or environmental protection categories, compared to 6 which are specifically for our field. And this is just good to bear in mind as we move forward. Again, it's naturally important that definition for our field is heard and shaped by as many conservation voices as possible. We really feel input from the professional community is fundamental to our success, and we've therefore been requesting feedback from everyone in conservation who's interested in this topic. Accordingly, in the second year of the GoGreen project, we've been setting up many meetings and sending out open invitations to discuss and disseminate our work in progress with the external focus groups of conservators and conservation scientists. After this, we'll be sending out surveys on our definition and parameters and disseminating to curators, museum directors, vendors and suppliers, and ultimately the professional bodies. Specifically, we're also able to collect information and feedback on the parameters from one survey we already carried out, since aspects of this particular work was to find insights into the factors or parameters that people in the field would be considering in terms of assessing the greenness of their materials and processes. When we got a great international response, and from predominantly conservators with more than 10 years of experience. So we were asking what information about products or treatments would you look for in such a tool, an app? And this gave great insights into which potentially green parameters would be considered important by conservators, of course. And it's also interesting to see how that matches with the information that they find that is available on these parameters. Also giving us useful insight, it's of course seeing which information is missing or lacking in these tools that are already existing. And as I mentioned, we've been setting up workshops on the definition and parameters with those external to the consortium. In the first place with researchers from within the cluster projects, MOXIE and Green Art, where happily we had good correlation with feedback from the workshops within our own consortium. And similarly within the broader community so far, which as I said has been in the first place with conservators and conservation scientists, although only a few are highlighted here, we've meanwhile had over 15 focus group meetings. There have been some small suggested edits, which we've variously incorporated into the definitions I've shown today. And often the discussion quickly turns to the eventual representations and manipulations of the green parameters. We're a very practical lot in conservation. Transparency comes out a lot. In general, there's a lot of interest in the parameters and almost everyone's interested to be contacted again about these aspects. So it's all been very positive. So happily, so far, we've had some great input and suggestions and a good consensus for the green definition and parameters. But I would like you to get your phones out if you're got them handy, because there's going to come some QR codes. Because it's not too late for you to have your say. We have one more focus group. And once that's finished, we'll be organizing a survey. So I'm just going to leave that up for just a few seconds. We can always come back to it if there's a need, but I'll let you all QR code that one.
The link is also in the chat if that's easier for you.
Perfect. Thank you, Julia. Thank you. And also what we currently have been showing here, we'll be presenting at the IIC Lima conference where we have a poster and, we're invited for an online workshop. So if you'd like to be informed, please, you can also scan these codes and Julia will no doubt also be popping these in the chat, the links. So if you want to sign up for the newsletter, please do so. And that would be amazing to have your contact details for further disseminating our work. And I think that's all from me. Thank you very much for your attention. And now I pass over to Caitlin to handle all the feedback and questions.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Gwen. I really am always blown away by how much hard work you and Julia have put into this, but even more so how beautifully it's come together. And I think as we've seen, defining green for the cultural heritage field and specifically for conservation is not so straightforward. And I think that this is why it's so important that we have clarity on what we mean by green conservation, because as we've seen, there are multiple ways to come at this. And so everyone is kind of has their own perspective or their own interpretation, which is why it's imperative for us as a field to have consensus on what green means for our field in order for us to actually achieve it. So a huge thank you. As Gwen mentioned, this is 100% a co-creative process. It is so important to us that everyone is not only aware of this, but more importantly, on the same page and agrees with the definition. This is not us creating the definition. This is all of us creating the definition together. And so we would love your feedback as Julia and Gwen mentioned, we have focus groups that we're running right now to workshop and go through the definition in more detail. But of course, we're also going to be posting a survey a little later. I believe that's coming out this fall, once our focus groups are finished, where we'll be asking for more feedback. But this is also an opportunity right now. So I would love to open up the floor for questions. Of course, any feedback is also welcome, but would love to hear if there's anyone that would like to ask anything of the Working Package 8 group. So if you would like, please do feel free to pop your question in the chat, or if you prefer, we're all friendly here. You're very welcome to also unmute yourself and turn on your camera and say hi if you have a question. So maybe Gwen, I can ask you to stop sharing your screen so that we can see if
Yeah, I had a little technical difficulty. I asked it to stop sharing and it doesn't
Oh.
seem to want to stop sharing. And now my stop sharing button has disappeared. So I'm going to try and struggle with that.
That's okay. I'm gonna steal it.
Can
and
you
then
steal it? Oh, perfect. Thank
do
you.
that.
Thank you.
Stop sharing. There we go.
Thank you.
I hope you didn't see too much. Perfect. So does anyone have any questions about the process of figuring out the green definition? Any questions about what we've presented so far today? Or of course, any questions about what we want to or intend to do with the green definition? So I'll give everyone just a second. I know we also have lots of languages today, so please do feel free to pop your questions in the chat if you have any. Or once again, if you prefer to unmute yourself, you're very welcome to join the conversation. All right. Gwen, I think that you're just super clear with everything. You've gotten really good at this. Fantastic. All right. Well, we'll keep the chat open. Oh, thank you, Agnes. That's a very good question. Will there be a publication? I think this is actually more of a Gwen question.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, there will be a publication. In the first place, Julia, Caitlin, and Katrine Kuhn and we are publishing the work in progress version of the definition and parameters as it now stands in the IIC Lima conference in a poster. So that will be available as a publication. And then eventually, yes, there will be a bigger publication, sort of delving more into our process, we hope, later in the project.
Yes, and in addition to conference publications and more academic publications, we will also be presenting the final definition in a brochure, which we are hoping we will, actually not hoping, we will be distributing worldwide in multiple languages, I'm hoping. And also we would like to be advocating for this with our membership organizations. So if you are part of any of the membership groups, including ECHO, IIC, ICON, ICOM, etc., you will be seeing us advocating for the adaptation of the green definition in order to ensure that as a conservation field, we're all on the same page and talking about the same thing and endorsing the same definition. So thank you so much for that. We had a couple of comments. Thank you, Agnes. Are we open to sharing the bibliography on this? I think we very much are. Absolutely. That's a very good question. Do we have a place that we've published the bibliography for the resources that we've looked into? I don't think we do.
Not as it stands, the most current version, not yet, but the SSC Resource Center is one place where there's already a lot of literature on the topic, but for the GoGreen collection as a total, not yet.
Okay, perfect. So you can also find some information on the SIC website, which is siconserve.org, but we will publish the resources on the GoGreen website after the definition is sorted out and we have a final resource list. So thank you. That's a great suggestion. Wonderful. All right. Any other questions or anything else that we can provide for our audience today? It's nice to know that all of your guys' hard work and research is going to be very appreciated, it sounds like. Wonderful. Okay, well, just to wrap up, once again, if you have any additional questions, please do feel free to reach out to us. I think that Julia already posted the email address for the Go Green project, and maybe we can post it again. But we would love to stay in touch and keep each other posted. So please do join one of our focus groups. We're certainly hoping that you will sign up for our newsletter, in which we will be keeping everyone posted on the progress. And also, please do follow us on social media, where we post all of the most recent information as well as updates and announcements. So once the survey is ready for Go Green, we will be publishing that all over the website as well as our social media channels. We're on LinkedIn, we're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, we're on Facebook, we're everywhere. So find us in whatever preferred social media platform you would like, or sign up for our newsletter to stay posted. And we really hope to be hearing back from you, your feedback on the definition. Once again, the most important thing for us here is that you guys agree with what we're saying, because this is not us saying it. This is just us facilitating the conversation. And so we want to make sure that everyone is really happy with the result. So if you have questions, comments, feedback, we really, really welcome that. So a huge thank you again. Oh, fantastic. We have another question. Have you identified a working group, institution, or publication that can already help conservators working in small collections to adjust to greener temperature and RH parameters? That's a great question. I don't know, Julia or Gwen, if you have specific publications. I obviously have a lot to say about that topic, because that is everything that I do right now. But I don't know if there's a specific element. This is, I think, a little bit more related to the work we're doing at Key rather than the Go Green work. Florencia, we have a bibliography we've put together at Key specifically on literature related to temperature and RH, so everything climate control. If you would email me, and I'll just pop my email address in here, southwick@keyculture.org. I can send you some more information, and that goes for everyone else too. We are actually currently running, and this is a side note, we're currently running a climate control program to help support institutions in implementing greener temperature and RH parameters. So if you'd like more information about that, please do email me. So thank you for the question. Excellent. And if there are any other questions, now is a good time. I will give a short summary of what next steps are. As we know, we are continuing to gather information, so we'll be publishing the final results, I believe, in 2025. As soon as we have a final working definition, it is advocacy time. So as I mentioned, we will be reaching out to all of the membership organizations globally to get everyone on board. We would also love to have all of you give us a thumbs up on the final definition to make sure we're happy with it, and that we're all ascribing to what we mean by green conservation. And of course, the difference between green conservation and greener conservation, which I think is really well put in the definition as an ideal and a practice. And I think that that's going to be really helpful for us in determining the distinction between the perfect ideal of what green is, and also what practicalities and aspirations are able to be implemented. So you'll be seeing a lot of information from us after the definition has been finalized, and we're hoping that this can help all of us work together towards a greener field and towards a greener future by understanding what green actually means. So a huge thank you so much, everyone, for some really wonderful questions here today. And yes, thank you, Sam. The Image Permanence Institute, IPI, has some great publications on climate control as well. So thank you for pointing in that direction. Those are freely available online. So a huge thank you to everyone for joining us today, and a huge, huge thank you and a big congratulations to Gwen and Julia for all of your hard work in putting this together. It's quite a undertaking, and I think you guys have done a beautiful job. Once again, please sign up to our newsletter, follow us on socials so that you can keep posted. But otherwise, we look forward to staying in touch. and joining us in our next work package webinar, which will be announced shortly. So thank you, everyone, from Go Green and from the Horizon Europe project. We look forward to continuing to work together towards a greener future. Have a wonderful day.